Cruel father beat his daughter at the market until an Amish man arrived to save her. The Colorado market squared us rising, wagons rattling, and merchants shouting. Suddenly, a drunken settler lifts his switch high and strikes his trembling daughter before the eyes of the whole town. The crowd watches in silence until heavy boots step forward. A broad-shouldered Amish man blocks the blow, his voice steady. No child is born to be beaten. The market falls silent. The father snarls. The sheriff hesitates, and the girl. She clutches her basket, eyes wide with terror, knowing if she goes home, she may not survive the night. But this quiet stranger carries more than strength. He carries mercy. Yet standing between a father's fury and a daughter's freedom will spark a storm that could tear the town apart. What will triumph in the end, cruelty and lawless pride, or faith and the courage to protect the innocent? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Colorado Market Square as wagons creaked over well-worn ruts. Merchants' voices rang out, competing with the clatter of horse hooves on packed earth. Fresh corn, 2 cents a ear. Leather goods, finest in the territory. The water well served as the heart of the bustling Saturday gathering, where townsfolk clustered to trade news as readily as goods. Through this lively scene stumbled Jonas Wheeler, his boots scraping erratically against the dirt. His bloodshot eyes and whiskey-soured breath marked him before he'd gone 10 paces. Behind him trailed his daughter Ava, her thin frame made smaller by the way she hunched her shoulders as if trying to disappear. Her faded calico dress hung loose on her frame, patched at the elbows and frayed at the hem. The basket she carried was heavy with turnips, though most had seen better days. Her arms trembled with the effort of keeping pace with her father's unsteady gait. As they passed the general store, her foot caught in a rut. The basket tipped, spilling wrinkled turnips across the dusty ground. Worthless girl. Jonas Wheeler's voice cut through the market chatter. Can't even carry a simple basket. He yanked a switch from his belt, the leather whistling as it cut through the air. Ava raised her arms to shield herself, but the blow never fell. A broad shadow fell across them both as a tall figure stepped between father and daughter. The man wore the plain, dark clothes and broad-brimmed hat of the Amish, his beard neat but untrimmed in their way. His hands, calloused from honest work, caught the switch mid-swing. "No child is born to be beaten," the man said, his voice steady and clear as a church bell. The words carried across the suddenly hushed square. Jonas Wheeler tried to wrench the switch free, but Ephraim Stoltzfus held firm. "This here's family business," Wheeler slurred, his face flushing darker. "Step aside. The Lord's business comes first," Ephraim replied, no heat in his voice but iron in his stance. "And he commands U.S. to protect the innocent." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the confrontation but maintaining a careful distance. Some women whispered behind raised hands, while others gathered the scattered turnips. Placing them carefully back in Ava's basket, Sheriff Hale finally pushed through the onlookers, his badge catching the morning light. He'd been watching from the doorway of the jail, nursing his coffee and hoping to avoid trouble. Now, shame colored his weather-worn features as he realized how long he'd waited to intervene. "That's enough, Wheeler," the sheriff said, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered Colt. "You're drunk before noon again. That's disturbing the peace in my book." Wheeler tried to protest, but his words tangled on his tongue. The sheriff took his arm, none too gentle, and led him toward the jail. "Sleep it off in the cells," Hale muttered. Again. As the crowd dispersed, their whispers trailing behind them like autumn leaves, Ephraim turned to Ava. The girl stood frozen, her eyes wide and wary as a wild thing's. "You need not fear," he said softly. I have a place outside town. You can rest there until your father is himself again." The ride to Ephraim's line shack was quiet, broken only by the steady clip-clop of his horse's hooves and the creak of wagon. Springs. The simple dwelling stood alone against the vast Colorado sky. A humble testament to honest work with its clean-swept yard and carefully tended vegetable patch, as evening painted the sky in deep purples and golds. Ava sat at Ephraim's rough-hewn table, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea. The last light caught the bruises on her wrists, marks that spoke of more than just today's violence. "I can't go back," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the crickets starting their evening song. "He'll kill me one day. He's gotten worse since Ma died. The drinking, the rage." Her words faded into a shudder. Ephraim stood at his small window, watching night settle over the land. Without turning, he reached into a chest and drew out a clean wool blanket. "Then you shall stay here tonight," he said simply, laying the blanket across his spare cot. "We will seek God's guidance together." In the quiet that followed, Ephraim's prayers rose silent but steady as the stars emerging above his humble home. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the darkening plain. But within those four walls, for the first time in years, Ava felt safe. Enough to sleep. Dawn crept over the Colorado plains, painting the sky in gentle brushstrokes of pink and gold. Inside the line shack, Ephraim rose from his simple bed, careful not to wake Ava, who slept fitfully on the spare cot. He pulled on his boots and black coat, moving with the quiet efficiency of long habit. The morning air held a crisp bite as he stepped outside, carrying his tin milk pail. His cow, a gentle Jersey, lowed softly in greeting. The rhythm of milking, learned in his childhood back in Pennsylvania, brought a measure of peace to his troubled thoughts. A twig snapped behind him. Ephraim turned to see Ava standing uncertainly at the edge of the barn, her arms wrapped around herself as if for protection. "I thought maybe I could help," she said softly. "By gathering wood." "That would be kind," Ephraim replied, noting how she startled at the distant crow of a rooster. "The woodpile is behind the shack. Take only what you can carry, easily." As Ava moved carefully around the yard, Ephraim observed her flinching at every sudden sound, the thud of falling wood, the rustle of wind through grass, the call of morning birds. Her fear ran deep, like water beneath stone, inside Ephraim. Stirred cornmeal into the cast-iron skillet while coffee bubbled in its pot. The familiar scents seemed to ease some of Ava's tension as she settled at the rough-hewn table. Steam rose from their cups as morning light filtered through the window's clean-scrubbed glass. After Ma died, Ava began, her words barely above. A whisper, Pa started drinking more. At first, it was just words, cruel ones that cut deep. Then came the hitting. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. 3 years now. Sometimes I think he blames me for her fever taking her. Ephraim listened without judgment, his steady presence inviting truth without demanding it. When she fell silent, he simply nodded and broke the cornbread, offering her the larger portion. Later, as they rode into town in Ephraim's wagon, the morning bustle had already begun. The sheriff's office stood quiet, its windows reflecting the early sun. Inside, Sheriff Hale looked up from his paperwork, his expression guarded. "I cannot keep him locked up more than a day or two," the sheriff admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. "Disturbing the peace ain't much of a charge, and Judge Wilson, he left the sentence unfinished." But his meaning was clear. The law had limits, especially when it came to a man's treatment of his family. At the general store, whispers followed them like shadows. Ephraim ignored the stares as he purchased supplies, flour, salt, and coffee. Ava stood close to him, her shoulders hunched against the murmured conversations. "Mr. Stoltzfus." A woman's voice cut through the gossip. Martha Kendrick, a ranch widow known for her straight talk, gestured him aside. Her weathered face was creased with concern. That girl's father, he's made a deal with Hank Dawson over in Silver Creek, selling her off to clear his whiskey. Dad's, her voice dropped lower. Dawson runs that saloon and his serving girls. Well, they serve more than drinks, if you take my meaning. The news settled like lead in Ephraim's stomach. He looked at Ava, who stood examining a bolt of calico with longing fingers, and saw afresh how young she was, too young for such cruelty. The ride back to the line shack was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As evening painted the sky in deep blues and purples, Ava began to hum softly while helping to wash the supper dishes. The tune was simple but sweet, rising and falling like a gentle stream. "My mother taught me that," she said, catching Ephraim's questioning look. "She used to sing it while making bread. Ephraim nodded, and then, to Ava's surprise, his deep voice joined her melody with a harmony line. The Amish hymn's words spoke of peace and shelter, of God's protecting hand. Though the words were German, the meaning seemed to bridge the space. Between them, Ava's eyes widened at the unexpected beauty of their blended voices. For the first time since he'd met her, a genuine smile touched her lips. The music filled the simple room, transforming it from a mere shelter into something warmer. The first tentative threads of trust weaving between them as the last notes faded into the gathering dusk. Ephraim knew with certainty that he could not return Ava to her father. The thought of her being sold to pay for whiskey debts, traded like cattle at market, went against everything he believed about God's children. His role as temporary protector had become something deeper, a calling he could not ignore. Morning sunlight dappled the dirt track as Ephraim's wagon creaked toward the creek. Empty wooden barrels rattled in the back, and Ava sat beside him on the worn leather seat, her face tilted toward the warmth. The steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves marked their progress through the golden Colorado morning. "Water's sweeter at the creek than the town well," Ephraim explained, his deep voice gentle. "Worth the extra distance." As they rounded a bend, where cottonwoods cast long shadows, Ava suddenly straightened. "Luis," she called out, her voice carrying unexpected joy near the creek bank. A Cherokee boy about Ava's age looked up from where he knelt among clusters of wild plants. His leather bag was already half full with gathered herbs. At Ava's call, a bright smile spread across his face. Before Ephraim could slow the wagon completely, Ava had already jumped down, her feet finding sure purchase on the dusty ground. She ran to her friend with none of the fear that usually marked her movements. Ephraim watched thoughtfully as he brought the wagon to a stop. "I was worried when you weren't at market," Louis said, standing to greet her. His movements were fluid and careful, like someone used to reading the forest's signs. "Grandmother said there was trouble." "I'm staying with Mr. Stoltzfus now," Ava explained, gesturing toward the wagon. "He's been kind to me." Louis nodded respectfully to Ephraim, then reached into his gathering bag. "Here," he said, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Dried cedar for tea. Remember how your mother showed us to brew it?" Ava's fingers trembled slightly as she took the bundle, bringing it to her nose. "She said cedar brings strength," she whispered. Like the trees themselves, Ephraim observed their interaction from the wagon, noting how Ava's shoulders relaxed. In Luce's presence, here was a friendship born of shared understanding. He realized two young people finding connection despite the town's rigid boundaries, while Ephraim filled the barrels. Louis showed Ava the herbs he'd gathered for his grandmother's medicines. Their quiet conversation drifted over the sound of running water, punctuated by occasional laughter. Back in town, a different scene was unfolding. The jail door clanged open, and Ava's father stumbled out into the harsh midday sun. Sheriff Hale watched from his office door, his face tight with concern as the man immediately made his way toward the saloon inside the dim establishment. Ava's father slammed his fist on the bar. "That girl's mine by right," he declared to anyone who would listen, his words slurring. Up. Ain't no plain-dressed farmer gonna keep what's mine. I'll show him what's what. The other patrons shifted uncomfortably, some turning away, others nodding with false sympathy just to quiet him. His angry boasts echoed off the walls, growing louder with each drink. Evening found Ava in Ephraim's kitchen, her sleeves rolled up as she worked bread dough on the flour-dusted table. Her movements were quick but uncertain, kneading with more force than necessary. Gentle now, Ephraim guided, demonstrating with his own weathered hands. Bread's like people, responds better to patience than force. Ava nodded, adjusting her touch. Under his instruction, the dough began to smooth beneath her fingers, becoming silky and elastic. The familiar scent of yeast filled the kitchen, mingling with the cedar tea Louise had given her. Through the window, he could hear the clip-clop of passing horses as neighbors rode by. Voices drifted in, carrying judgment wrapped in false concern. Taking in strays already, that Stoltzfus fellow. Ain't proper. A single man with a young girl. It's bound to be trouble, mark my words. Ephraim let the words pass like wind through wheat, focusing instead on Ava's growing confidence with the dough. Her face held the first real peace he'd seen since their paths crossed. As the bread rose in its pan near the stove's warmth, Ava knelt beside it. Her whispered prayer carried clearly in the quiet kitchen. Please, God, could this be a real home? Just this once. Ephraim, standing by the window, felt something stir in his heart, a sense of rightness, of purpose found. The evening light painted the kitchen in soft gold, transforming the simple scene into something sacred, a young girl's prayer, the promise of bread, and the first tentative bonds of family forming in unexpected ways. Sunday's first light brought the measured toll of church bells floating across the valley. Their bronze notes echoed off the distant mountains, calling the faithful to worship. Ephraim stood in his dooryard, adjusting the mare's harness, while Ava emerged from the cabin in her faded but carefully pressed dress. "Ready?" he asked softly, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. She nodded, climbing up beside him. The morning air held the crisp promise of autumn, and Ava pulled her thin shawl closer as they set out toward the white clapboard church that stood sentinel at the edge of town. They weren't the first to arrive, but heads turned as Ephraim helped Ava down from the wagon. Her presence beside the tall Amish man sparked immediate reaction. Whispers rustled through the gathering congregation like wind through dry grass. "Ain't that the drunk's girl?" Bold as brass, bringing her here. Someone ought to speak to the preacher about this. Inside the church, sunlight streamed through simple glass windows, painting golden rectangles on the wooden floor. Ephraim and Ava settled into a pew near the back, but distance didn't stop the sideways glances and muttered comments. Preacher Whitfield took his place behind the pulpit, his weathered face solemn as he surveyed his flock. His sermon text was from Matthew. "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." The preacher's rich voice filled the small space. "The Lord calls us to stand between the helpless and those who would harm them," he declared, his eyes seeming to rest particularly on Ephraim. "Justice without mercy is but violence dressed in law's clothing, and mercy without justice serves only to protect the wicked." Ephraim sat straight-backed, feeling the weight of the words settle on his shoulders. Beside him, Ava's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her face tilted toward the preacher's message of hope after the final hymn. While the congregation filed out into the sunshine, Preacher Whitfield drew Ephraim aside. They stood in the shadow of the church, their voices low. "You're walking a dangerous path, friend," the preacher cautioned, his eyes kind but serious. "That girl's father won't take kindly to your interference. There could be violence." Ephraim nodded slowly. "I've considered that, and yet you persist." The preacher studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps this is God's calling for you. But be prepared for the cost." Outside on the church steps, the congregation lingered in small clusters. Some, like widow Sarah Miller, approached Ephraim with words of encouragement. "It does my heart good to see someone standing up for that child," she said, pressing his hand warmly. Others were less approving. "A man's household is his own business," declared Thomas Weber, a local farmer. "You're asking for trouble, Stoltzfus." The afternoon found them back at the lined shack, where Ava worked in the small garden patch behind the cabin. Her quiet humming of the morning's hymns drifted through the open window. While she carefully weeded between the rows of late vegetables, Ephraim sat on the porch, working on a worn harness strap, his strong fingers moving steadily with awl and thread. His mind turned over the morning's events, weighing his right to step into Ava's life against the clear danger she faced. The preacher's words about God's calling echoed in his thoughts as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. Ava's humming faded. She stood in the garden, her arms wrapped around herself despite the lingering warmth of the day. "Night's coming," she said softly, her voice carrying a tremor. Ephraim set aside his work. "What troubles you about the dark child?" "He was worst," she whispered. After drinking all day, his fists would. She couldn't finish. "You're safe here," Ephraim assured her, his deep voice steady and certain. "No harm will come to you under this roof." Later, after Ava had gone to bed, Ephraim lit the oil lamp in his small bedroom. The flame cast warm light across his desk as he took out paper and pen. With careful strokes, he began his letter to the circuit judge. "Your Honor, I write concerning the welfare of one Ava Morrison, aged 14 years. I seek legal guardianship to ensure her protection from grievous harm." The scratching of his pen mingled with the evening chorus of crickets while the ink dried on words that might change both their lives forever. Monday morning dawned clear and cool. Ephraim hitched the mare to the wagon while Ava wrapped their lunch of cornbread and apples in a clean cloth. The wheels creaked as they set out for town, following the rutted road that wound past scattered homesteads and sun-bleached prairie grass. "The courthouse makes me nervous," Ava admitted, smoothing her skirt with trembling fingers. "Truth needs no fancy words," Ephraim replied, his steady hands loose on the reins. "We'll speak plain and let God handle the rest." The courthouse stood 2 stories tall, its red brick walls rising above the dusty street. Inside, the clerk's office smelled of ink and old paper. Behind a high desk, the clerk barely glanced up from his ledger, his pen scratching across the page. "Guardianship papers," he muttered, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "That's complicated business. Could take weeks to process." He shuffled through a stack of documents with deliberate slowness. Ephraim stood quietly, his broad shoulders straight. "The child needs protection now," he said, voice firm but respectful. "Surely there's a way to expedite matters." The clerk sighed, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Judge Thompson returns Friday. Best I can do is put you on his docket then." He dipped his pen and made a note, drops of black ink spattering the page. 10 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." "Much obliged," Ephraim replied, touching his hat brim as they stepped out into the morning sunshine. A familiar figure lurked in the shadow of the courthouse columns. Ava's father leaned against the weathered wood, his bloodshot eyes following their every move. A stream of tobacco juice splattered against Ephraim's boots. "Thinking you can steal my property," he sneered, pushing away from the column. "That girl's mine by law and blood. I'll have her back. Make no mistake." Ephraim placed a gentle hand on Eva's shoulder, turning her away from her father's malicious grin. "The Lord will decide what's right," he said quietly, guiding her toward their wagon. "The Lord?" Her father spat again. "Ain't him you need to worry about, plain man." The ride home was silent, but Ava's shoulders gradually relaxed as the town fell behind them. At the line shack, she threw herself into preparing their evening meal, showing surprising skill with the meager ingredients. "Mama taught me," she explained, stirring the pot of beans and salt pork. "Said a woman needs to know how to make something from nothing." Her eyes grew distant. Before she got sick, the afternoon light slanted through the windows as Luis appeared at their door, a bundle of fresh sage in his arms. His dark eyes were serious as he handed the herbs to Ava. "Grandmother says to dry these for winter tea," he said, then lowered his voice. "Your father's been asking questions at the saloon, offering drinks to anyone who knows where you're staying." Ephraim nodded gravely. "Thank you for the warning, Luis. We'll be careful." Thunder rumbled in the distance as Luis departed, and soon fat drops of rain drummed against the roof. Ava settled near the lamp with Ephraim's worn Bible, its leather cover smooth from years of handling. "Would you like to read?" she asked shyly, holding out the book. "Please," Ephraim answered, settling into his chair. Her voice grew stronger as she read from Psalms, the ancient words of comfort, mixing with the steady patter of rain. When she finished, Ephraim knelt beside his chair, head bowed in evening prayer. Ava slipped down beside him, her small hand clutching his sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered as they rose, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I haven't felt safe like this since Mama died." Ephraim's weathered face softened. "The Lord provides shelter for all his children," he said simply, but his heart warmed at her trust. Outside, the storm washed the prairie clean, while inside the humble shack, two souls found refuge in shared faith and quiet strength. Tuesday morning painted the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. Ephraim stood at the door of the lined shack, studying the horizon, while Ava tied her worn apron. They needed supplies from town, though the thought of facing more whispers made his jaw tighten. "Best get an early start," he said, reaching for his hat. The mare nickered softly as they hitched her to the wagon, her breath making clouds in the cool morning air. The general store's bell jangled as they entered. Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, measured out flour while other customers lingered, their voices carrying across the wooden floors. "Plain folk have their ways," old Jim Tucker declared, leaning on his cane. "That Stoltzfus fellow, he's decent through and through. Saw him help Widow Barnes with her roof last month. Wouldn't take a penny for it." "Decent ain't the point, Frank," Miller shot back, his cattle brand visible on his vest. "A man's household is his own business. This Amish fellow's stirring up trouble where none needed stirring." Ava's shoulders hunched as she clutched her basket, face flushing red. The weight of their stares pressed down like summer heat. "Pay them no mind," Ephraim murmured, placing cornmeal and coffee in their basket. "Their words change nothing about who you are." But Miller wasn't finished. "Girl's got a proper father. Maybe not perfect, but blood is blood. Who's this outsider to interfere?" "I reckon some blood runs mighty thin," Tucker retorted, his weathered face stern, "especially when it's mixed with whiskey." Ava's hands trembled as she reached for a spool of thread. Ephraim noticed her distress and quickly finished their shopping, laying coins on the counter with a quiet thank you. The ride home was silent until they crossed the creek. "It is not your fault," Ephraim said firmly, glancing at Ava's downcast face. "Their arguments are about their own fears, not your worth." Back at the lined shack, Ava threw herself into chores as if trying to prove her value. The cow, a gentle brown Swiss, stretched her neck toward the girl's approaching footsteps. When the animal nudged Ava's shoulder with her soft nose, a surprised laugh escaped her lips. "She likes you," Ephraim observed, carrying the milk pail. "Would you like to learn something new?" Ava nodded eagerly. Ephraim showed her how to pour cream into the butter churn, demonstrating the steady rhythm needed. "Not too fast, not too slow," he explained. Like this, the wooden dasher made a pleasant thumb splash as Ava worked. After several minutes, her arms grew tired, but determination showed in her eyes. Finally, Ephraim checked the churn and smiled. "Look here," he said, showing her the pale yellow lumps forming. Ava's face lit up with pride. "I did it," she exclaimed, then quickly covered her mouth, as if surprised by her own joy. The afternoon sun was lowering when hoofbeats approached. Sheriff Hale dismounted, his expression grave as Ephraim met him at the door. "Thought you should know," the sheriff said quietly, checking that Ava was out of earshot. "Judge Thompson's been known to take gifts from certain parties, and your neighbor's been flashing coin at the saloon." Ephraim's stomach tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. Wish I could do more," Hale replied, adjusting his gun belt. "But the law ain't always as straight as it should be." He touched his hat brim and rode away, leaving worry to gnaw at Ephraim's thoughts. As evening settled over the prairie, Luis appeared with an armload of fragrant cedar branches. "For your stove," he explained, setting them carefully by the woodpile. "Grandmother says cedar smoke keeps evil spirits away." Ava arranged the branches while humming a hymn she had learned at Sunday service. Her clear voice lifted the melody of Amazing Grace into the gathering dusk. Luis sat quietly on the steps, adding his own soft harmony when he knew the words. Ephraim paused in his work, watching the two young people share their song. Ava's face glowed in the last sunlight, so different from the frightened girl who had arrived just days ago. Though concern for Friday's hearing weighed heavy on his mind, seeing her moment of peace felt like a gift from heaven itself. The hymn ended as the first stars appeared. Luis bid them good night, leaving them with the peaceful scent of cedar and the gentle settling of evening across the land. Wednesday's dawn painted frost across the grass stems, each blade glittering like tiny diamonds. Ephraim adjusted his coat collar against the autumn chill as he watched Ava and Luis load empty baskets into the wagon. The morning light caught their breath in silver puffs. "The foothills have good kindling," Luis explained, pointing toward the purple shadows of the distant slopes. "And Grandmother says the last herbs need gathering before winter comes." Ephraim clicked to the mare, and the wagon wheels creaked into motion. Ava sat forward, eyes bright with anticipation. The rising sun warmed their backs as they left the flat prairie for the gentle rise of the foothills. When they reached a sunny slope scattered with pine trees, Ephraim drew the wagon to a halt. Ava stepped down carefully, turning in a slow circle to take in the view. Purple asters and yellow goldenrod dotted the grass between the trees. "I have never," she started, then stopped, twisting her apron in her hands. "Father never let me just walk. To look at things. Luis gestured to a patch of flowers. "See these purple ones? They help with fever." He demonstrated how to gather them properly, showing respect with a small prayer of thanks. "And these," he pointed to some woody stems, "make tea for coughs." Ava followed Luis from plant to plant, her basket slowly filling with kindling and herbs. Her questions tumbled out eagerly, and Luis answered each one with patience learned from his grandmother. Ephraim gathered larger branches nearby, watching the young people with quiet satisfaction. "The Lord provides teachers in unexpected places," he murmured to himself, noting how Ava's natural curiosity bloomed in freedom. Her smile, so rare days ago, came more easily now. By early afternoon, their baskets were full. The wagon rattled back into town, where they needed to collect mail. The saloon's batwing doors burst open as they passed, spilling out raucous laughter and the stench of whiskey. "Ain't no judge gonna give my girl to some plain-talking foreigner." Ava's father's voice carried across the street. "Got something special for Thompson?" "I do." Ava shrank down in the wagon seat. Luis touched her arm briefly in comfort, while Ephraim kept his eyes forward. Guiding the mare past the saloon, Sheriff Hale stepped out of his office as they approached the post office. "Ephraim," he called softly. "A word." Ephraim nodded to thee. "Children to wait with the wagon." The sheriff's face was lined with concern. He's been drinking heavy and talking bigger, Hale said. Making threats, you best be prepared for trouble. I thank thee for the warning, Ephraim replied steadily. But I must follow where the Lord leads. The sheriff shook his head. The Lord might appreciate you keeping a shotgun handy, just in case. Ephraim's only response was a quiet smile as he returned to the wagon. Twilight found them back at the line shack, where Ava insisted on baking bread to thank Luis for the morning's lessons. Luis showed her how to add some of the herbs they had. Gathered to the dough, explaining how his grandmother made healing breads. The kitchen filled with warm, yeasty scents as the loaf rose. Ava and Luis sat at the table, heads bent together over the remaining herbs as Luis taught her their names and uses. Their laughter mingled with the homey sounds of the crackling stove and bubbling soup pot. Ephraim paused in his work to watch, them feeling his heart expand with unexpected tenderness. These children, one running from cruelty and one sharing ancient wisdom, had brought new life to his quiet home. When the bread was done, they shared a simple but cheerful supper. Luis demonstrated how to crumble the herbs into their soup, and Ava served thick slices of the fragrant bread with pride. The peaceful moment shattered with the crash of breaking glass. A rock tumbled across the floor, wrapped in a dirty scrap of paper. Ava's bowl clattered to the table as she jumped up with a strangled cry. Luis moved quickly to her side, while Ephraim retrieved the note. 2 words were scrawled in shaky letters. She's mine. Ava's whole body trembled as she stared at the broken window. He's coming for me, she whispered. He will hurt all of us. Ephraim crossed the room in 2 long strides and placed a steady hand on her shaking shoulder. Let us pray, he said firmly, his deep voice filling the frightened silence. Lord, we ask for thy strength in this trial. Guide our steps, protect these children, and show us thy path through darkness. Give us courage to stand firm in thy light. The broken window let in the evening chill, but Ephraim's hand remained warm and shore on Ava's shoulder as the prayer hung in the air between them. Thursday's pale light crept through the broken window, casting jagged shadows across the lined shack's wooden floor. Ephraim studied the splintered frame, measuring the damage with careful fingers. The morning chill seeped through the ragged hole where the rock had struck. I can help, Ava said softly, approaching with a box of tools she had gathered. Please. I don't want to be useless. Ephraim turned to her, noting the determination in her stance despite the shadows under her eyes. Thee is never useless, child. But I would welcome thy assistance. Together they worked to remove the broken glass, Ava holding each piece steady as Ephraim loosened the putty. Her small hands proved nimbler than his at fitting the new pane into place. My mother taught me to be careful with glass, she explained, smoothing putty along the edges. She said gentle hands make lasting work. A knock at the door startled them both. Luis stood in the doorway, his usual smile replaced by worry. Grandmother sent me to warn you. Ava's father spent the night at the saloon, gathering men. He's offering whiskey and promises to anyone who'll help him take her back. Ephraim's hands stilled on the window frame. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on his shoulders. Perhaps withdrawing the petition would prevent violence. Protect them all from what was coming. As if reading his thoughts, Ava grabbed his arm. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please don't send me back. I know it's hard, having me here. But he'll kill me, Mr. Stoltzfus. If not with his fists, then by selling me to men who Ma. She couldn't finish. Ephraim looked down at her trembling hands on his sleeve, remembering his vow of non-violence. But wasn't there violence too in standing aside while evil triumphed? We shall continue as the Lord leads, he said finally. Come. We need supplies from town, okay? The wagon ride into town felt longer than usual. I followed them down the dusty street, some sympathetic, others hostile. At the general store, the shopkeeper's wife served them quickly, barely speaking. Folk are taking sides, Luis murmured, helping load their purchases. Some say you're stirring up trouble that don't need stirring. Ephraim nodded gravely. Truth often brings discomfort before it brings peace. They stopped at the church, where Preacher Whitfield was mending hymnals on the front steps. He set aside his work when he saw them approach. "The Lord's timing brings you here," the preacher said, gesturing them to sit. "I've been praying about your situation, Brother Stoltzfus. I find myself uncertain," Ephraim admitted. "My ways are peaceful, yet this path seems to lead toward conflict." The preacher's weathered face grew serious. Sometimes peace requires us to stand firm. Remember David before Goliath? He didn't seek violence, but he didn't shrink from defending what was right. He turned to Ava. "Child, the good book tells us God is father to the fatherless. He sees your struggles." Ava ducked her head, but her shoulders straightened slightly at his words. The rest of the day passed in quiet work around the shack. Ava insisted on cooking supper, though her movements grew slower with exhaustion. Luis stayed to help, showing her how to season the beans with herbs from his grandmother. As they finished eating, Ava's head began to droop. She fought to keep her eyes open, but eventually slumped forward. Her cheek pressed against the wooden table. Ephraim rose quietly. With gentle hands, he lifted her slight form. She stirred, but didn't wake, curling trustingly against his chest like a much younger child. The thought that anyone could harm something so vulnerable stirred a deep protective instinct in his heart. He carried her to the small back room where he had arranged a bed for her. Laying her down carefully, he drew the quilt up to her shoulders. In sleep, the worry lines smoothed from her face, leaving only innocence. "Lord," he whispered, his hand resting lightly on her hair, "guard this little one through the night. Grant her peace in her dreams, and give me wisdom to protect her in thy way." Moving quietly, he banked the fire and checked the locks. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkening prairie. Their wild songs echoed across the night, somehow emphasizing the fragile peace of the sleeping child within the shack's walls. Ephraim sat in his chair by the fire, Bible open on his knee, keeping watch as the night deepened around them. Friday dawned with gray clouds hanging low over the Colorado Valley. Ephraim rose before first light, his movements deliberate. As he dressed in his cleanest black coat and pressed shirt, his reflection in the small mirror showed worry lines around his eyes. But his resolve remained steady. In the kitchen, Ava sat perfectly still at the table, her mother's worn prayer book clutched tight against her chest. She had barely touched her breakfast of cornbread and milk. Her dress, freshly washed and mended, made her look even younger than her years. "The Lord sees truth," Ephraim said softly, adjusting his broad-brimmed hat. "We must trust in his wisdom today." Outside, the morning air bit sharp with autumn chill. As Ephraim hitched the wagon, his mare sensed his tension, stamping restlessly until he gentled her with quiet words. Ava climbed up beside him, her prayer book now wrapped carefully in her shawl. The courthouse loomed ahead of them in town, its wooden steps already crowded with onlookers. Whispers followed their progress inside. The courtroom smelled of dust and pine polish with morning light streaming through tall windows. Judge Harrison sat behind his elevated desk, his face as cold and hard as November frost. Ephraim had heard rumors of bottles of fine whiskey being delivered to the judge's house, but he pushed such thoughts aside. They had truth on their side, if only ears would hear it. This court will now hear testimony regarding the guardianship petition for Ava Miller. The judge announced, his voice carrying no warmth. "Let the witnesses come forward." Mrs. Peterson, the rancher's widow, spoke first. "I've watched that child grow up under the shadow of her father's fists," she declared firmly. "Mr. Stoltzfus has given her the first peace she's known since her mother passed." But Tom Watson, who ran the saloon, painted a different picture. A man's got rights to his own flesh and blood, he insisted. This Amish fellow's stirring up trouble where there ain't none to be had. Ava's father slouched in his chair, looking almost respectable in borrowed clothes, but his eyes gleamed with malice when he testified. She's my daughter, my property by law. This stranger's turned her against me, filling her head with fancy notions. The morning dragged on, witness after witness offering conflicting views. Some praised Ephraim's gentle guidance, while others defended a father's absolute authority. Through it all, Ava sat silent, her fingers white-knuckled around her prayer book. Finally, Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "This case requires additional consideration," he announced. "I will render my final decision tomorrow morning." Court dismissed. Ephraim's heart sank at the delay, recognizing it as a poor sign. But he kept his face calm for Ava's sake as they made their way out of the courthouse. "You ain't won nothing yet, Amish." Ava's father called after them, his voice thick with whiskey despite the early hour. "Come tomorrow. She's coming home where she belongs." Ephraim placed a protective hand on Ava's shoulder, guiding her quickly to the wagon. She trembled beneath his touch but held her head high. The ride back to the line shack passed in heavy silence. Luis was waiting for them, his young face creased with concern as they approached. "Grandmother sent me to check on you," he said, falling into step beside Ava as they walked to the house. "She's been burning sage all morning, praying for wisdom to guide the judge." From his pocket, Luis drew a sprig of fresh cedar, pressing it into Ava's hands. "Remember what I taught you about cedar. It brings strength and protection. Hold it close tonight." Ava managed a wan smile, bringing the sprig to her nose and breathing in its sharp, clean scent. "Thank you, Luis," she whispered. "I need all the strength I can get now." As evening settled over the prairie, Ephraim lit the lanterns and spread his papers on the table. His testimony notes needed careful review before tomorrow's final hearing. The lamplight cast dancing shadows on the walls as he worked, choosing each word with precision. Ava knelt beside his chair, her prayer book open. On her lap, her whispered prayers mixed with the scratch of his pen. "Dear Lord, please help the judge see truth. Please don't let Papa take me away. Please give Mr. Stoltzfo's wisdom to speak right." The quiet was suddenly broken by the distant thunder of hoofbeats approaching through the darkness. Both Ephraim and Ava froze, listening as the sound grew closer to the line shack dot. The midnight darkness pressed heavy against the line shack's windows. Ephraim jolted awake at the sound of frantic barking from the neighbor's dogs. His feet hit the cold floor before his mind fully cleared. Years of farm life had taught him to heed such warnings. Outside, the autumn air bit sharp through his nightshirt. Moonlight caught the fresh hoofprints circling the shack, the dirt still loose where horses had passed. His throat tightened at the sight someone had been watching. Testing their defenses, he checked on Ava through her door crack. She slept fitfully, one hand still clutching Luce's cedar sprig. Ephraim kept vigil until false dawn, his Bible open on his lap as he prayed for guidance. Morning arrived pale and tense. Ava emerged from her room with shadows under her eyes, her movements jerky as she helped prepare their simple breakfast of porridge and coffee. The spoon rattled against her bowl as she stirred. "Your hands are shaking," Ephraim noted gently. "I heard them last night," she whispered. "The horses. Papa used to circle our old house like that when he was angry." Ephraim laid his weathered hand over her trembling ones. "We must trust in the Lord's protection. He has brought us this far with purpose. But what if we will face this day with courage?" he said firmly. "Fear serves no good end." They had just finished hitching the wagon when Luis came running up the path, his breath coming in gasps. Sweat plastered his dark hair to his forehead despite the cool morning. "Mr. Stoltzfus," Luis called out. "You need to know Ava's father's been at the saloon since dawn." He's drinking heavy and bragging about some plan to take her, no matter what the judge says. Ephraim felt Ava stiffen beside him. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, noting how she leaned into his touch like a frightened fawn seeking shelter. "Much obliged for the warning," Louis Ephraim said. "But we must trust in the law and in God's providence." The courthouse square was already crowded when they arrived. Townsfolk parted before them, their whispers following like autumn leaves in the wind. Ephraim helped Ava down from the wagon, keeping himself between her and the hostile stairs. Inside, the courtroom hummed with tension. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked against wood, calling for order. Ava's father slouched in his chair, eyes bloodshot and gleaming with malice. The smell of whiskey rolled off him in waves. "This court will now hear final arguments in the matter of guardianship," the judge intoned. But before Ephraim could rise to speak, Ava's father lurched to his feet. "Ain't no need for more talking," he slurred. "She's mine to do with as I please. Already got $50 down payment from the McGilty Ranch. They need a fresh girl for their place." A shocked murmur rippled through the courtroom. Several women gasped. The judge's face darkened with disapproval. "Mr. Miller, you will contain yourself or be held in contempt." But Ava's father was beyond hearing. "50 now and 50 when I deliver her. Good money for damaged goods." "Order!" The judge's gavel crashed down. "This court will recess for 1 hour, while the rest was lost in sudden commotion." As people filed out of the courtroom, rough hands seized Ava from behind. 2 men Ephraim recognized from the saloon dragged her toward waiting horses. "No!" Ava's scream pierced the morning air. "Ephraim!" Ephraim fought through the crowd, his heart thundering. But more men blocked his path, shoving him back. He glimpsed Ava being lifted onto a horse, her face white with terror. "Stand aside," he commanded, his voice carrying across the square. "You cannot." A fist caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. By the time he regained his feet, the horses were already pounding away, Ava's cries growing fainter. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Ephraim alone in the dust. A few feet away lay Ava's prayer book where it had fallen, its pages fluttering in the wind like broken wings. The town square buzzed like an overturned beehive. Women clutched their shawls tight, whispering behind trembling hands. Men shifted, uneasily averting their eyes from Ephraim's direct gaze. The courthouse doors stood open, papers scattered across its wooden steps where the struggle had taken place. Sheriff Hale emerged from his office, buckling his gun belt with weathered hands. His face was drawn tight as he approached Ephraim. "This ain't right," the sheriff muttered, towing Ava's fallen prayer book in the dust. "Taking a girl like that? Then help me find her," Ephraim said, his voice steady despite the storm in his heart. "Your badge means something, Sheriff. Use it." Hale's shoulders slumped. "My deputies are 3 days out, running escort on a silver shipment. I'm short-handed, Stoltzfus, and those men who took her, they're McGilty Ranch hands. Mean bunch, so you'll do nothing." Ephraim's words carried across the square. "I didn't say that." The sheriff scratched his stubbled jaw. "Odd. But I need time to gather men. Send telegrams. Ava doesn't have time." Ephraim turned away, his long stride carrying him toward the white-painted church at the edge of town. Inside the cool darkness of the sanctuary, Ephraim knelt before the rough-hewn altar. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, painting patterns. On the floor, like God's own fingerprints. His prayers rose silent but urgent. Hours passed as Ephraim wrestled with his conscience. His Amish vows forbade violence, yet Ava needed protection. Could he bear arms without betraying his faith? Would God understand if he carried a gun to rescue an innocent? The sanctuary grew dim as afternoon faded to evening. Finally, Ephraim rose from his knees, peace settling over him like a familiar blanket. He would go after Ava, but not with weapons of steel. His faith would be his shield. Miles away, Ava huddled against a fallen log, her wrists raw from rope burns. Rothas. Hired men had handled her roughly, passing a whiskey bottle as they rode. They'd ignored her tears, laughing when she stumbled. Now they sprawled around their campfire by the river, their crude jokes carrying on the night wind. Her father sat apart, already snoring off his drink. The smell of whiskey and unwashed bodies made her stomach turn. Ava's fingers found the cedar leaves hidden in the folds of her dress. Luis had taught her their significance during their herb-gathering walks. Cedar smoke speaks to those who know how to listen, he had said, demonstrating how to arrange the leaves for signaling, waiting until the men's attention wavered. Ava carefully slipped several leaves from her dress. Her hands trembled as she gathered tiny twigs, remembering Luce's lessons. The fire pit must be small, hidden just enough to send a thin stream of sacred smoke into the darkness behind a screen of river willows. Ava arranged her materials. The first match from her stolen handful flared bright, then died in the breeze. The second caught the cedar leaves, their sharp, sweet scent rising with curls of pale smoke. "Please," she whispered, "please let someone see." Miles back along the trail, Ephraim and Luis studied the darkening landscape. The boy had appeared at the church door just as Ephraim emerged, offering to help track Ava's captors. "There," Luis pointed suddenly. "See that thin smoke? It rises straight, not like a campfire." Ephraim squinted into the distance. A faint silver thread rose against the stars, almost invisible except to knowing eyes. "Cedar smoke," Luis explained. "I taught Ava how to signal with it. That's her calling for help." Ephraim's heart lifted with fresh hope. "The Lord provides guidance in unexpected ways," he said softly. "Thank you, Luis. And thank you, Father, for showing us the path." The boy nodded solemnly. "We should move careful now. They'll be camped by the river where the horses need water." Ephraim gazed at the distant smoke signal, his resolve strengthening. He would bring Ava home, not through violence, but through faith and wisdom. God had led him this far. He would trust in that same providence to light the way ahead. The night wind carried the scent of cedar, sweet as prayer. As they began their careful approach toward the river camp, the first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of pearl and gold. Ephraim and Luis rode steadily toward where they had seen the cedar smoke, their horses' hooves muffled by the damp morning grass. The boy's eyes scanned the ground, following signs only he could read. Broken twigs, disturbed earth, a thread from Ava's dress caught on a bramble. "They passed here not long ago," Luis whispered, pointing to fresh hoofprints in the soft earth. Ahead, morning mist clung to the riverbank, where Ava sat huddled against a fallen log. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair tangled, but her spirit remained unbroken. While the men slept off their drink, she whispered prayers into the growing light. "Lord, please keep Ephraim safe. Show him the way." Her father stumbled from his bedroll, face twisted with the pain of too much whiskey. His bloodshot eyes fixed on her with familiar cruelty. "Ungrateful brat," he snarled, kicking dirt toward her. "After all I'd done for you, running to that plain-dressed fool. Well, you'll fetch a fair price where we're headed." The hired men stirred at his voice, grumbling as they packed their gear. Two of them argued over payment, their harsh words carrying across the camp. "We was promised $20 each," one growled. "Ain't seen nothing but promises. You'll get paid when the job's done," Ava's father snapped, but uncertainty crept into his tone. From the cover of riverside willows, Ephraim observed the scene. His heart ached at Ava's fear, yet peace settled over him like morning dew. Violence would only breed more violence. God had shown him another way. Taking a deep breath, Ephraim stepped into the clearing. His hands were raised, empty of weapons. The morning sun caught his broad shoulders as he walked steadily forward. The hired men reached for their guns, but something in Ephraim's calm presence made them hesitate. Their jeers died in their throats. "Friend Ava," Ephraim called, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Art thou well?" "Stop right there," Ava's father demanded. But his words slurred with lingering drink. Ephraim kept walking, his eyes never leaving the father's face. "Thou wouldst sell thine own daughter, the very flesh God gave thee to protect." The words struck like summer lightning. Several men shifted uneasily, looking away. "Ain't your business," the father blustered, but his voice wavered. "It became my business when thou raised thy hand to her in the town square," Ephraim replied. "When thou chose whiskey over thy child's welfare, when thou made plans to sell her like cattle." Two of the hired men gathered their horses, muttering excuses. They mounted quickly, unwilling to face the truth in Ephraim's words. Ava's father swayed, caught between shame and fury. The mask of drunken cruelty cracked, revealing the broken man beneath. "You don't understand," he choked. "The debts, after her mother died? I understand grief," Ephraim said softly. "I too have lost a wife, but pain gives thee no right to harm the innocent." More horses thundered in the distance. Louis had completed his mission. The sheriff and a group of townsfolk were approaching fast. Ava's father heard them too, his face draining of color. Ava rose shakily to her feet. No one moved to stop her as she walked to Ephraim's side. His steady presence wrapped around her like a shield. The sheriff's party burst into the clearing, reining their horses in a cloud of dust. They found no violence, no drawn guns, only a father facing the weight of his sins in the clear morning light. "What's all this then?" Sheriff Hale demanded, though his eyes said he already knew. "These men took Ava against her will," Ephraim stated simply. "Her father planned to sell her to cover gambling debts." The remaining hired men dropped their heads, unable to meet the townfolk's accusing stares. The truth lay bare in the morning sun. Stripped of darkness and deceit, Ava pressed close to Ephraim's side. Her prayers answered, not with thunder and lightning, but with the quiet strength of faith. The morning breeze carried the last traces of cedar smoke away into the brightening sky. Sheriff Hale's face hardened as he dismounted, his boots stirring dust in the morning light. The weight of past inaction hung heavy on his shoulders, but now clarity guided his steps. "Marcus Thompson," the sheriff called out to Ava's father. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, child endangerment, and attempted trafficking." Two deputies moved forward, their hands steady on their gun belts. Ava's father staggered backward, his bravado crumbling like dry creek mud. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, spittle flying. "She's my property." The gathered townsfolk murmured in disgust. Women who had looked away before now stared with open condemnation. Men who had stayed silent shifted their feet, shame coloring their faces. "No child is property," Sheriff Hale declared, his voice carrying across the clearing. The deputies seized Marcus's arms, wrestling him toward their waiting horses despite his struggles. "You'll regret this," Marcus screamed as they dragged him away. "All of you." But his threats scattered like dead leaves in the wind, empty and weightless. Ephraim drew Ava close, his broad hand gentle on her shoulder. "Thou art safe now, child, truly safe." Ava pressed her face against his rough wool coat, tears soaking the fabric. Louis stood nearby, straight and proud, despite his exhaustion from the hard ride for help. The Cherokee boy had ridden through the night, refusing to rest until he had gathered enough witnesses to the truth. "Much obliged, friend Louis," Ephraim said softly. The boy nodded, a quiet smile lighting his face. Judge Harrison cleared his throat from atop his horse. The morning's events had stripped away his previous indifference. "There will be a formal hearing this afternoon," he announced, "though I believe we've seen enough evidence to settle the matter of guardianship." Back in town, the courthouse filled quickly. Word had spread like wildfire, drawing curious faces and concerned neighbors. Ava sat straight-backed beside Ephraim, her trembling hands clutching her recovered prayer book. The judge's gavel struck sharp and clear. Having witnessed the grievous actions of Marcus Thompson, and in consideration of the testimony of reputable townsfolk, I hereby grant full guardianship of Ava Thompson to Ephraim Stoltzfus. The gavel fell again with finality. May God guide you both. Ava's fingers found Ephraim's calloused hand. I have found my true home, she whispered, voice thick. With emotion as evening settled over the land, wagon wheels crunched on the path to Ephraim's lined shack. Neighbors arrived bearing covered dishes and well-worn hymn books, their earlier silence transformed into active support. The ranch widow, who had first warned Ephraim, brought a fresh-baked pie. The preacher's wife carried a quilt sewn with welcome. Lantern light spilled from the shack's windows, turning them to squares of warm gold. Inside, the humble space filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and friendship freely given. Ava moved among the guests, offering slices of bread she had baked that morning in Luce's grandmother's kitchen. Her steps were light, unburdened at last. Ephraim stood in the doorway, watching the gathering with quiet joy. When the room settled, he raised his voice in prayer. Lord, we thank thee for thy mercy this day, for strength that comes not from violence, but from faith, for neighbors who stand together in truth, for bringing this child to safety and showing us all a better path. Amen. The gathered voices responded softly. Someone opened a hymn book, and soon the night air filled with melody. Ava's clear voice joined the harmony, no longer afraid to be heard. Louise sat by the hearth, contentedly sharing stories with younger children who had come with their parents. The lanterns glowed steadily, no longer warning lights against danger, but beacons of celebration. Where fear had ruled, now peace settled like a blessing. The shack that had been a temporary shelter had become a true home. Filled with the light of fellowship and hope, Ephraim watched Ava move among their guests, her face shining with newfound belonging. The Lord's mercy had turned darkness to dawn, bringing restoration not just to one child, but to an entire community's heart. The night deepened outside, but within the shack's warm walls, none hurried to leave. They had witnessed grace in action, and its gentle power held them in communion. Hymns and quiet conversation mingled with cricket song drifting through the open door. A harmony of healing for all who gathered there. Sunday morning painted the Colorado sky in strokes of rose and gold. Dew sparkled on the grass as Ephraim stepped out onto his porch, breathing in the crisp autumn air. The sound of Ava humming drifted through the open window as she prepared for church. Luis arrived just as they were setting out, his dark eyes bright with anticipation. Together, the three walked down the dusty path toward town, their boots crunching on fallen leaves. Ava wore her freshly pressed dress, a gift from the preacher's wife, while Ephraim's plain black coat gleamed in the morning light. The white clapboard church stood against the brightening sky, its bell tower reaching toward heaven. As they approached the steps, Ephraim noticed the difference immediately. Instead of sideways glances and whispered judgments, faces turned toward them with genuine warmth. Welcome, welcome. Mrs. Peterson called out, holding the door wide. Other congregation members nodded and smiled, making space in the pews. Ava's fingers tightened around Ephraim's arm as they walked down the aisle, but this time from joy rather than fear. Luis settled beside them, his presence a reminder of how their small family had grown beyond expected boundaries. Preacher Whitfield stood at the pulpit, his weathered face glowing with purpose. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes that danced like glory made visible. Brothers and sisters, the preacher began, his voice carrying to every corner. Today we celebrate redemption. His eyes found Ephraim and Ava in the congregation. This week we witnessed how true strength flows not from the fist, but from mercy. Not from pride, but from humility. The congregation listened intently as he spoke of transformation, of how God's love could turn the hardest heart toward grace. When we choose mercy, he declared, we choose God's path. When we protect the innocent, we walk in his footsteps. Ava sat straighter, her face glowing with newfound dignity. Ephraim noticed several women dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs, while strong men nodded solemnly at the preacher's words as the service ended. Mrs. Turner approached them, her usual stern expression softened. "We would be honored if you would join us for Sunday supper," she said. "Both of you." She included Luis in her smile, breaking another barrier. Throughout the afternoon, more invitations came. The Petersons offered fresh-baked rolls, the Wilsons brought a ham, and even the sheriff's wife contributed her famous apple pie. What began as one invitation expanded into an impromptu gathering in the market square, the same square where just days ago Ava had trembled under her father's switch, now filled with the sounds of fellowship. Tables appeared from nearby homes, covered with checkered cloths and laden with food. Children played tag between the adults' legs while women arranged dishes, and men set up benches. As the afternoon sun began its westward slide, someone suggested hymns. The preacher's wife brought out her accordion, and soon the market square filled with music. Amazing Grace floated on the autumn air, followed by Be Thou My Vision and other beloved songs. Ephraim watched in quiet wonder as voices joined in. Harmony. Where there had been judgment, now there was joy. Where fear had ruled, now peace prevailed. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet he recognized it as the natural fruit of choosing love over indifference. Ava stood beside him, her face tilted up to catch the golden light. "I never dreamed it could be like this," she whispered. "I keep thinking I might wake up, but I don't want to. I'm already home." Ephraim placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, steadying her as he had that first terrible morning. But now his touch carried promise instead of mere protection. In his heart, he made a silent commitment to God and to his community. His door would remain open to others in need, his home a sanctuary for those seeking shelter from life's storms. As evening approached, the gathering slowly dispersed. Families walked home together, carrying empty dishes and full hearts. Luis helped pack up the remaining food, promising to visit tomorrow with more of his grandmother's herbs. The three of them walked back to the lined shack as the sun painted the western sky in deep oranges and purples. Ephraim lit the lamps, their warm glow spilling from the windows across the yard. The humble building that had once seemed so lonely now radiated welcome. Inside, Ava moved about the kitchen with comfortable familiarity, humming as she put away leftovers. The lamplight caught her face, showing peace where there had once been fear. Ephraim watched her, marveling at how God could weave hope from heartache, family from fragments, and turn a simple lined shack into a true home filled with promise. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.